Randall Voss slid the finalized transfer deed across the conference table at Voss Legal Group on East Trade Street in Charlotte. The paper was heavy, the kind that professional documents use. Textured linen finish. The motion unhurried. The gesture of someone who had performed this same action 1,000 times with other people's marriages. Except this time it mattered in a way he would never fully understand. "Miss Ferreira," he said, "this transfer deed removes Griffin Calloway from the title entirely. From this point forward, the property at 4118 Whitfield Avenue is in your name alone." I did not reach for it immediately. I looked at the deed lying there, the signatures already dry, the notary seal crisp and final, the legal instrument that had taken 3 weeks to arrange and 7 years of marriage to justify the need for. The house appraised at $344,000. The only house I had ever wanted to keep. That was the strange part. Randall was explaining the mechanics, the filing procedures, the timeline for recording with the Register of Deeds. And what I was actually feeling was not relief. It was something closer to recognition. The particular stillness of someone who had prepared for this for 63 days and was now watching the preparation finish itself. The way a long-held breath finally releases. "How long until this is official?" I asked. "Already is," Randall said. "The Register received it yesterday morning. I wanted to make sure you had a copy in hand before the weekend." He paused. "Before anything else happens." He knew, not the details. Randall's job was to ask for nothing but signatures and notarization, but the shape of the thing. A woman who arrives in an attorney's office with her finances separated, her accounts moved, her mind already made. He had seen it before. He would see it again. I picked up the deed. The weight of it seemed disproportionate to what it actually was. Paper, ink, the legal apparatus that said the title was mine. For 7 years. Griffin and I had held it jointly. For the past 9 weeks. It had been in process. The paperwork moving through county offices while Griffin texted about hotel rooms and told me he had been in Raleigh. And 9 days from now, he would walk into 4118 Whitfield Avenue expecting to negotiate the terms of his departure, expecting that house to be something he still had a claim on, something he could leverage, something that would require his cooperation to resolve. There would be nothing left to negotiate. "What was it like," Randall asked, "when you first contacted me?" I had thought about this question before, but I answered it now because I owed him the honesty. "I knew exactly where your card was," I said. "I had been keeping it. I knew where it was the day I needed it." He nodded. That was the thing about Randall Voss. He recognized work when he saw it. Not the desperate scramble of someone who had just realized what was happening. The deliberate architecture of someone who had seen the shape of the fall and had begun building the structure to survive it long before the actual falling started. I drove out of the parking garage on East Trade Street at 2:47 in the afternoon. The autumn light was coming at a low angle through the windshield, the kind that makes the whole city look like it's made of something fragile, all angles and brightness you can't hold on to. I pulled into a space on the 3rd level of a parking garage 2 blocks away and turned off the engine. I did not call anyone. I did not text my brother Roland, though he was waiting to hear that the transfer had finalized. I did not call my divorce attorney, though we had an appointment scheduled for Tuesday and she was expecting the deed to be filed. I did not reach for my phone at all. I simply sat there, hands on the steering wheel, the envelope with the transfer deed on the passenger seat beside me, and I let the weight of something finished settle on the whole car. 11 minutes. I was not trembling. I was not crying. I was not doing any of the things that women in movies do when they have finally positioned themselves to survive something. I was simply sitting with what I had built across 63 days and nights of deliberate patience. The transfer of $47,000 to an account at First National Bank of the Carolinas in my name alone. The documentation of $14,200 in redirected joint funds on a yellow legal pad kept in my nightstand. The separation of our checking account. The addition of my name as sole holder on the deed to a house that Griffin had stopped paying attention to years ago because he was certain it would always be there when he needed it. The way I always would be. It would not be there. The silence in the car was absolute. Not the silence of shock or relief, but the silence of something delivered. I had known for 63 days that this moment was coming. I had built the moments before it. I had moved money in installments, called an attorney whose card I had kept like a promise to myself, consulted with a divorce lawyer, documented everything Griffin had taken and every account he had drained, and I had done it all while sleeping beside him and saying good morning and asking how his day had been. Now the deed was mine. I started the engine and pulled back into the light. In 9 days, Griffin would sit down and tell me he was leaving, believing the conversation was still something he could negotiate. The night Griffin said her name was a Thursday in mid-October. We were making dinner. I was chopping cilantro. He was at the kitchen island scrolling through his phone with the focus of someone who was pretending not to focus, when he said it too carefully. Paige Sutton reached out on LinkedIn. She's back in Charlotte. I kept chopping. I haven't seen her in, 6 years, he said. And then he set the phone face down on the granite before the sentence actually finished, as if the act of flipping it over could contain what he had just said. I knew who Paige Sutton was. I had never met her. She had left Charlotte before Griffin and I met, but I had heard the shape of her in his voice the way you hear the shape of something in the dark. 6 years in Austin, a past tense he had positioned as settled, the exact kind of person. I was learning that a man describes as settled when he is not. That's nice, I said. That she reached out. I did not look at him. I looked at the cilantro becoming smaller. Later, when I tried to remember what I felt in that moment, I could not separate the feeling from the knowledge of what was already beginning, because what was already beginning was so incremental that it arrived not as a rupture, but as a series of small redirections, each one small enough to be explained. The dinner he came home from at 8:47 when he said it would be 7:30. The meeting ran long. No inflection, no apology. He had told me the meeting was in Durham. I had not asked him to elaborate. The gym bag in the car that I found on Saturday morning, soaked through, clothes at the bottom going sour. He must have gone to the gym, then come home, then gone out again. But the timeline did not quite fit the route he had described. And when I asked, he said, "Yeah, I hit it twice this week. I'm trying to get serious about the workout thing." And something in the way he said it made me understand that this was a lie he had prepared. The Asheville weekend that was supposed to be a couple's trip became a solo trip on a Tuesday morning. Work thing came up. One of the regional guys is moving. Team dinner. I should be there. He left before I woke up. He came back Sunday night smelling like hotel shampoo and someone else's perfume. Faint but there, threaded through his jacket collar. I was not going to ask him directly. I had learned something in those 10 days. Learned it the way you learn the temperature of water by putting your hand in it, which was that asking a man directly about a lie is a way of giving him the chance to become better at lying. So instead, I sat with the inventory of small redirections, and I began to understand that what I was looking at was not a sudden rupture, but a reopening. A door I thought was closed that Griffin had been quietly, deliberately finding the hinges of. By the Saturday after that first Thursday, I had moved $8,000 from our joint checking account to a solo account at First National Bank of the Carolinas. I did not hide it. The transfer was visible on the statement, a line item like any other, because Griffin did not look at the statements. He did not look at anything that required him to attend to the architecture of our life. He administers attention in installments. I had said to myself years ago when I was still making excuses for how he loved me, he will grow out of it. Now I was looking at the evidence that he had not. By the following Thursday, I had transferred another $13,000. By the Thursday after that, I stopped counting the separate transfers and simply watched the number grow. I was not trying to hide anything. I was trying to understand the shape of the thing that was happening by understanding its cost. I sat at the kitchen table at 11:47 on a Thursday night, 2 weeks and 4 days after Griffin set his phone face down on the granite, with my laptop open to 9 weeks of joint account transactions. A yellow legal pad lay beside the keyboard, line by line. I added up every charge I did not recognize, every restaurant, every hotel, every cash withdrawal that appeared in the middle of the day, dinners, rooms, flights, cash. The arithmetic was not complicated. It was just a series of choices, rendered in dollar amounts. At the bottom of the page, after I had circled the number twice and then circled the circle, I wrote $14,200. If stories about women who stay quiet long enough to see the full shape of a betrayal are why this channel exists, a like and a subscribe is how the next one gets told. I sat back from the laptop for another few minutes, hands in my lap, not moving, not reaching for my phone yet, simply holding the weight of what I had just quantified. The number was real now. The betrayal had an address, and in 7 weeks, he would sit down at this same table with no idea that I had already mapped every transaction. I first heard Paige Sutton's name in the spring of 2016, when Griffin and I had been together for 6 months. We were at a dinner party at someone's house in Dilworth, I don't remember whose, and one of his colleagues mentioned seeing a girl from college. "That's Paige," Griffin said, and something in the way he said it made me look up from my plate. "She left Charlotte a long time ago. Austin. I think she's not coming back." He said it like a fact he had verified, like he had checked. I did not ask him anything else about her that night. I learned early in my relationship with Griffin that asking questions about certain things, ex-girlfriends, paths not taken, versions of himself he had shelved, was a way of inviting him to become defensive about choices he had already decided were settled. So I let the name sit, the way you let a piece of information sit when you do not yet understand why you are storing it. He told me the real story in my apartment in the summer of 2018, 2.5 years into our relationship. We were still in the phase where you can tell someone your worst story and have it land as endearing rather than as a warning. He was sitting on my couch, the window open to the sound of Tryon Street traffic, the August heat pressing against the glass, and he was describing the end of whatever he and Paige had been to each other. "She was incredible," he said, "but she wanted more than I could give. She wanted commitment, real commitment, not just the idea of it, and I was 28 and I wasn't ready to be that person yet." He paused. "She left for Austin, and it was genuinely the best thing that could have happened to me." I asked him what he meant. "It meant I could just be," he said. "I didn't have to perform or promise things I wasn't sure about or have the same conversation over and over about what we were building. When she left, I got my life back." This is the moment I should have understood something. Not about Paige. I did not yet know that Paige was the marker of a pattern, the first instance of a relational geometry that Griffin would repeat. What I should have understood was something about myself, about what it means when you hear a man describe the departure of a woman who wanted commitment as a relief, and you do not let that description inform your own choices. Because I was listening to him tell me that he had experienced real love as a cage, that he had experienced a woman's need for consistency as a demand he resented having to meet, that he had framed her leaving as his liberation. And I married him anyway. I told myself a story. I told myself that he was showing me his worst self in year one, the way people do when they are still young enough to be honest. I told myself that 7 years of marriage would sand down the edges of his selfishness, that consistency and partnership would gradually become something he wanted rather than something he endured. I told myself that Paige had been the right woman at the wrong time, and that I was the right woman at the right time, and that this distinction mattered more than the fact that Griffin's definition of right seemed to be willing to ask for very little. What I did not tell myself was what I was actually watching. A man describe his relational pattern in real time, the way he showed up completely in the first weeks of something, when the newness made him feel like a version of himself worth being. And then, after that initial phase faded, the way he withdrew into a kind of administration of attention, visiting the relationship in installments, the way you visit a place you used to care about but have moved on from. The first 4 to 6 weeks fully present, then the long, slow leaving, even while still in the house. I knew it, on some level. I knew it when he said it, sitting on my couch in August 2018, describing how relieved he had been when she finally left. I married him in 2017, and I spent the next 7 years making room for a man who was never fully present except in the narrow window of time before he decided he had already committed to the shape of who he was. Making room for the administered attention, the redirections, the small lies about where he had been. Making room for the understanding that loving Griffin required me to love an absence, a withdrawal. And then, in October, His phone buzzed with a notification. A woman from Austin had found him again on LinkedIn. The same woman he had told me, sitting on that couch, had been the best thing that could have happened to him, because she had left. But now she was back, and I had 9 weeks to understand what that meant before he sat down to tell me he was leaving too. The Westin Charlotte charge appeared on the statement on October 12th at 11:47 in the morning. I was still at the kitchen table. The laptop had moved to the side, but I was still there. The way you stay in one place when you have finished calculating something and cannot yet move on from the weight of the number. $247. College Street. The night Griffin said he was in Raleigh. I did not call him. I picked up my phone and found the card instead. It was in the back of my home office desk drawer, exactly where I had put it 14 months earlier at a mixer at the Levine Museum of the New South. The kind of event I attended professionally and Griffin attended only when obligated. The card had been handed to me by a man in a suit near the bar, and I had thanked him and filed it away the moment I got home. Randall Voss, property and estate attorney, Voss Legal Group, Mecklenburg County, North Carolina. His handwriting on the back, a phone number, nothing else. I had kept it without knowing why. The way you keep a business card from someone you might never call. The way you file things away as insurance against a future you cannot yet imagine. 14 months it had sat there, gathering dust in the back of the drawer. 14 months of Griffin coming home later than he said, of him mentioning Paige was back in the city, of me choosing to believe that a man who shows you his worst habit in year 1 will have grown out of it by year 7. Now I was going to test that belief. I called from the parking garage of the Meridian Wealth Advisors building on South Tryon Street at 2:14 in the afternoon. My car was running, but I was not driving anywhere. I was sitting in the spot where I parked every morning, in a parking garage that smelled like concrete and fluorescent lights and the faint remnant of someone else's perfume. My phone to my ear, telling a stranger's voicemail that my name was Nadia Ferreira and I needed to speak to someone about transferring property title. Randall Voss called back at 3:47. I need to remove my husband's name from the deed to our house. I said, the house is currently in both our names. I want it to be only in mine. How long does that take? He asked the questions a good attorney asks. Was the house marital property? How long had we been married? Did my husband know I was calling? Did I have the deed? I answered everything with the precision of someone who had already prepared the answers. Yes, it was marital property. 7 years married. No, he did not know. Yes, I had the deed in hand. By the time we finished the conversation, Randall had scheduled me for a consultation 2 days later and told me to bring any documentation I had regarding the property value, the mortgage, and the original title transfer. I brought everything. The consultation was on a Thursday morning. Randall explained the legal framework in sentences that landed like precedent. If I could demonstrate that I had separated my finances before announcing the separation, the property transfer would hold. If I moved unilaterally on the deed without having also separated accounts, it could be challenged as an act of desperation, as an emergency measure taken under duress. The protection was in the paper trail. The protection was in doing things in the right order, with documentation, with dates. The protection was in looking like someone who had planned this, not panicked about it. I had already moved $8,000. I did it again that weekend, another $5,000. By the following Tuesday, I had transferred $47,000 to a solo account at First National Bank of the Carolinas. I did not hide the transfers. They were visible on the joint account statement, a line item like any other, because Griffin did not look at the statements. He did not attend to the architecture of the life we had built together. He visited it in installments and called it presence. 3 weeks after the Westin charge appeared, I sat across from a divorce attorney in an office on East Boulevard. She was younger than I expected, with the kind of attention to detail that made me understand immediately why I had come to her. She took notes on everything I told her. The redirected money, the gym bag that smelled like someone else's perfume, the Asheville weekend that became a solo trip, the way he had started keeping his phone in his pocket instead of leaving it on the kitchen counter where I could see the screen light up. She wrote it down and then looked at me directly and asked, "Are you ready to do this?" I said yes. Because once you do this, you can't undo it. she said. Once you file, it's filed. Once you tell him, you can't take it back. Once you move the money and transfer the deed, those things are done. There's no walking it back. I understood completely. I had been preparing for it. I had been preparing for it since the moment I found the Westin charge and decided not to call him. I had been preparing for it every time I moved money in installments, every time I signed a document in Randall's office, every time I sat with the weight of what I was building. I'm ready, I said. I called my brother Roland on a Tuesday evening in early November. I did not call him to ask for permission or advice. I called him to tell him what I had already done. I'm separating from Griffin, I said. I've already transferred the money. I've already consulted with a divorce attorney. I've already met with a property attorney and initiated the deed transfer. I'm telling you because you should know, and because when this becomes public, I want you to know that I didn't do this on impulse. Roland was quiet for a long moment. Then he asked, "Does he know?" "No," I said. "Are you safe?" "Yes," I said. "I'm safe. I'm not in danger. I just needed you to know that I've thought about this carefully. I've planned it. I know what I'm doing." 63 days. That was the span from the moment I found that Westin charge to the moment Griffin would sit down at the kitchen table and tell me he was leaving. He would have no idea that I had already left. He would have no idea that every asset he thought was still negotiable, still something he could leverage or divide or use as a bargaining chip, was already secured in my name alone. He would walk into that conversation believing he was still in control of what came next. The conversation was 3 days away. It was a Thursday evening in November when Griffin came home with his sister. Deanna was at the kitchen table before I even understood she was coming. Griffin had called her first, had prepared her, had positioned her as moral support for his announcement in the way that people position allies when they are about to deliver news they know is going to land as a rupture. It told me everything about how he had framed this conversation to himself. Not as a betrayal, not as an abandonment, not as the conclusion of a 7-year marriage, but as something that required an audience, something that required someone to witness his difficulty and validate it. I was already sitting at the kitchen table. I had been waiting there since 5:47 in the afternoon, since Griffin had texted that he was bringing Deanna home with him, which was how I knew. No one brings their sister home to a marriage announcement unless they are building a structure of support around the moment they are about to fracture something. No one recruits a sibling unless they are afraid of the answer they will get if they are alone. "We need to talk," he said when he walked in, and his voice was careful in the way that voices are careful when they have rehearsed something. He sat down across from me. Deanna sat to his left, and I watched her settle into the chair with the posture of someone who has agreed to participate in something uncomfortable. "I know this isn't fair to you," he started, and then he stopped. He looked at Deanna. Deanna looked at her own hands. The pause stretched. It was the kind of pause that happens when someone has prepared a speech and loses track of what comes next, when the words they have written separate themselves from the voice that is supposed to deliver them. I did not fill it. I did not prompt him or reach across the table or soften my expression into something that might make this easier for him. I simply sat with it, the way you sit with a silence that belongs to someone else, watching it expand in the space between us. "I've been thinking about this for a long time," he said. "I know you'll probably be angry. I know you'll probably want to fight about the house and the money and all of that. But the truth is, I don't want to be married anymore." Deanna's hand moved across the table toward him, then stopped. She put it back in her lap. "I met someone," he said. "Her name is Paige. You know, I knew her before we met. She came back to Charlotte. And it's real. It's actually real in a way that I haven't felt in years, and I can't keep pretending that this marriage is working when I know it's not." The word real landed in the kitchen like a verdict. Real as opposed to what we had built. Real as opposed to the 7 years. Real as opposed to the house and the stability and the life constructed through ordinary presence and deliberate commitment. In his vocabulary, real meant the absence of responsibility. It meant the first 4 to 6 weeks of something new before the withdrawal set in, before he understood that he had to maintain it rather than simply inhabit it. I said one word, "Okay." Griffin blinked. He had been expecting something else. Anger, maybe, or tears, or a demand for details about how long and whether there was ever love. He had not been expecting me to simply accept the statement as though it were information delivered at a meeting, as though he had just told me the quarterly numbers and I had acknowledged them and moved on. "Okay," he said. "That's all you're going to say?" "Okay," I said again. Deanna looked up at me. I saw her face change. I saw the moment she understood that I was not shocked, that I had not been stunned by any of this, that I had known for 63 days exactly what was coming and had prepared for it with the precision of someone who manages other people's money for a living. Not with hope that a rupture won't happen, but with documentation of every transaction, every redirect, every movement of the life we had built together into a form that no longer required his signature to dissolve. If stories about women who stayed perfectly still while their marriages ended, who said one word in response to years of history, are why you came here, a like and a subscribe is how the next one gets told. I stood from the table. I did not shout. I did not cry. I did not ask him how long or whether he had ever loved me. I simply stood up and left the kitchen without looking back. 3 days later, he would return to this house with his own attorney. 3 days later, I would set a document on the kitchen table and watch the color drain from his face when he understood there was nothing left to negotiate. He came back on a Monday with an attorney. I watched from the window as they pulled into the driveway, Griffin in his work clothes, the attorney in a suit that was cheaper than Randall Voss's, the kind of quick-hired divorce specialist who appears when someone is in a rush and does not want to explain much. Griffin looked angry. The attorney looked prepared. Neither of them knew what was waiting inside the house. I answered the door before they reached it. "Come in," I said. "Can I offer you water?" The attorney looked slightly surprised by the civility. Most people, I imagine, do not greet their spouse's departure with an offer of water. He accepted. I filled 2 glasses and set them on the kitchen counter, then pulled a chair out from the table. The 4 of us, myself, Griffin, the attorney, and the empty space where a 5th person might have sat, arranged ourselves around the kitchen table at 4118 Whitfield Avenue. Griffin placed a stack of papers in front of him. His hands were shaking slightly. "Nadia, I've retained counsel regarding the forced sale of our marital property," he said, and his voice had the formality of something he had rehearsed. "I believe we can move expeditiously if you're willing to cooperate." The attorney slid the paperwork across the table toward me. I did not pick it up. Instead, I placed a single document on the table between us, the transfer deed, the one that bore my name alone and carried the date of October 19th. 9 days before Griffin sat down to tell me he was leaving. "The property is no longer in both of our names," I said. "As of October 19th, it has been in my name alone." The attorney's posture changed. I watched it happen, the way his body shifted, the way his hand came forward to take the deed, the way his eyes moved across the date and the notary's signature and the seal. He read the transfer twice. Then he looked at Griffin. "When did you authorize this?" he asked. "I didn't," Griffin said. "She's lying. She must have forged my name or something. This is duress. She knew I was going to leave and she did this to punish me." "I didn't forge anything," I said. I had my records in a folder on the counter. I placed them in front of the attorney. The transfer was completed on October 19th. The notary is Jennifer Marks. She's a notary public licensed with the state of North Carolina. The deed was signed in the presence of witnesses and filed with the county clerk. You can verify that with Mecklenburg County if you want. The attorney opened his phone. He pulled up the county records. He checked the filing date, the notary information, the seal. Then he looked at Griffin. "This transfer is valid," he said. "If she didn't forge your signature, there's nothing fraudulent about it. And unless she coerced you into signing, physically or verbally threatened you, which would be difficult to prove, there's no duress claim." "She knew I wanted to leave," Griffin said. His voice had lost its formality. It was just anger now, raw and uncalculated. "She did this to trap me. She wanted me to have no money to leave with." "She didn't trap you into anything," the attorney said quietly. He was looking at Griffin with the expression of someone who has just understood the true shape of his employment. "She prepared. That's different. I had my account statements with me too. The dates of the transfers, the amounts, The account numbers, the name of the notary who witnessed each signature. The attorney did not ask for them. He stood up and looked at Griffin. "There's nothing to litigate here," he said. "The property is in her name. The transfer was done properly. If you want to contest the separation of funds, we can look at the accounts, but without evidence of coercion or fraud, you'll have a difficult case, and it will be expensive." Griffin did not move. He was staring at the transfer deed the way you stare at something you had assumed was still yours and have just discovered belongs to someone else entirely. "You can go," I said to the attorney. I said it to Griffin too, but I was looking at the attorney. "Thank you for coming." The attorney left the water glass on the counter untouched. He gathered his papers and walked toward the door. Griffin did not follow him immediately. He sat at the kitchen table for another moment, looking at the deed, at my folder of records, at the house around him that had stopped being his to claim the moment I had filled out those transfer forms 9 weeks before he sat down to tell me he was leaving. Then he left. I watched from the window as he crossed the driveway to the attorney's car. The attorney did not look at him. Griffin got in the passenger seat, and they pulled out onto the street without speaking. I picked up the transfer deed from the table and folded it in half. Then in half again. I held it in my hand and looked around the kitchen, the counter where I had filled water glasses, the table where he had announced his departure, the house that had been ours and was now mine, the property that had carried only one name on its title since the day I had walked into Randall Voss's office with a business card from a mixer 14 months before any of this began. The deed was still warm from where I had been holding it. 6 months after Griffin moved in with Paige, I had the full accounting. The $14,200 that he had redirected from the joint account over 8 weeks, cataloged on that yellow legal pad during the 63 days I had been preparing, had been spent with remarkable precision. $5,200 for 3 nights at the Asheville resort he had told me was a solo work trip. Another $3,000 for flights to Austin, back and forth, twice moving Paige out of the city she had been living in for 6 years. The rest scattered across dinners, hotel rooms, cash withdrawals in the middle of the day. The divorce attorney had obtained the records. Griffin had not contested them. There was nothing to contest. The paper trail was clean, dated, documented with receipts and statements and the names of businesses and the precise times of transactions. When the divorce was finalized in April, it was brief and uncontested on the property because there was literally nothing to contest. I had already separated my assets before I announced the separation. The house was mine. The accounts were mine. The future was mine to structure or to leave entirely unstructured if I wanted to. He had walked out of a marriage with nothing but the clothes he was wearing and whatever Paige was willing to provide. Deanna called me 2 weeks after Griffin moved in with Paige. Her voice on the phone was different than it had been at the kitchen table. Smaller, ashamed. The voice of someone who had made a choice and was now living with its consequences. "I've known since August," she said. "I should have told you." "Yes," I said. I did not say it unkindly. I said it as a statement of fact. "I'm sorry," she said. "Okay," I said. There was a pause on the line, then, "He's going to hurt her the same way he hurt you." "I know," I said. 4 months after Griffin moved in with Paige, she called Deanna in tears. The pattern had arrived exactly on schedule. The initial weeks of full presence and attention, followed by the slow withdrawal into administration and distance. By late April, Griffin was already unreachable most evenings, the way he had been with me by year 2, the way he had been with her before he left Charlotte the first time. Paige was discovering what I had known for years, that his early intensity was not love, that his attention was not a promise, that the weeks of full presence were not a baseline, but a temporary condition that would inevitably fade into indifference and the small, deliberate cruelties of a man who had learned to mistake his own withdrawal for her failure. Deanna told me this when she called back, her voice carrying the weight of recognition, the understanding that her brother had not changed, that he would not change, that he would simply continue to select people and then slowly stop showing up for them in any meaningful way. "He's doing it again," Deanna said. "I watched him do this to you, and now he's doing it to her. You can't change him." I said, "She has to decide what she's willing to accept, the way I had to decide." Ryan Morrow called in March, before the divorce was finalized. He had been Griffin's friend, the one who had said nothing when the affair began, the one whose silence had been a form of complicity, the one who had maintained the pretense of neutrality while actually choosing a side. His call came with the tone of someone who expected sympathy, who believed that watching Griffin's new relationship deteriorate would somehow make us friends again. Allies in the understanding of Griffin's inadequacy. "He's really messed things up with Paige," Ryan said. "I think he's realized he made a mistake. I think he's realizing that leaving you was the biggest mistake of his life." I said. There was a pause, then, "Are you open to talking to him? Maybe helping him figure out how to fix this?" I said again. He did not call back. I stood at the kitchen counter of 4118 Whitfield Avenue on a Saturday morning in April, coffee in my hand, and looked around the house that was entirely mine now. Not mine because I had fought for it in court with the kind of aggression that leaves both parties wounded, but mine because I had prepared before I announced the separation, had moved my money before I told him I was gone, had positioned myself so carefully that there was nothing left to negotiate. The silence in the house was different than the silences I had kept during the marriage. Those had been the silences of a woman disappearing, of a woman learning to take up less space, of a woman editing herself smaller so that another person would choose to stay. This silence was the silence of someone who had arrived at a decision and acted on it with precision. This silence was the sound of a house that belonged to me alone, in a way that nothing had belonged to me alone in 7 years. I drank the coffee and did not think about Griffin. I did not think about Paige. I did not think about the pattern that would continue to repeat with whoever came after her. The cycle of intensity followed by withdrawal, of presence followed by absence. The coffee was still hot. The house was still quiet. I was still here, and I was not disappearing. Nadia's 63 days of silence was not the silence of a woman who did not know what was happening. It was the silence of a financial consultant who understood that documentation moves slower than emotion but lasts longer than anger, who chose to respond to betrayal not with confrontation but with transfers, notary signatures, and account numbers written in a careful hand. The silence itself cost something: the immediate relief of speaking, the chance to demand an explanation while the wound was still fresh. Instead, she built in that silence. She moved money across accounts. She consulted attorneys whose business cards she had kept in a desk drawer for reasons she did not fully understand until the moment she needed them. She documented every redirected dollar, every late dinner, every inconsistency between what Griffin said he was doing and where he actually was. What Nadia constructed in those 63 days was not revenge as most people understand it. It was the architecture of a woman who had learned that the person who keeps the records keeps the choice. The silence was a container for deliberate work: dates, amounts, notary seals, filing deadlines. And by the time Griffin sat down to announce he was leaving, Nadia had already left the belief that she had to accept the terms he was setting. Somewhere in your own life, there is a moment you have not yet responded to, a text you have not answered, a conversation you have not had, a document you have not filed. You are telling yourself it does not matter. The silence is not empty. It is building something.